The air in Cedar Ridge had a particular smell that you didn't find anywhere else. Pine needles, old rain, and faint with smoke, all rolled into one familiar scent that made you feel like time moved slower here. Jack Harlan sat on the porch of his father's old cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching a squirrel outthink gravity. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you forget to check your phone. He'd driven up Friday night, his old Ford humming all the way up the ridge, and by the time he parked under the pines, the stars were so bright they looked close enough to warm your hands on. For a retired firefighter who'd seen too much chaos and noise in his life, this was heaven. He'd promised himself he'd finally fix the cabin's leaky roof this weekend. Nothing fancy, just patching shingles, repainting trim, maybe tightening the porch steps that always squeaked in protest. It wasn't a hobby project. It was something deeper. His dad had built this place before the HOA even existed, back when folks didn't need bylaws to tell them how to cut their grass. Jack came up here to feel close to him again, to work with his hands and think in peace. He'd parked his truck right in front, dropped the tailgate and laid out his sleeping bag in the back. Didn't even bother bringing furniture inside. He liked sleeping in the open air, the forest humming its lullaby, the wind whispering through the trees. Somewhere around midnight, he'd heard the faraway cry of an owl and smiled. Felt right, like being a kid again, camping out behind the fire station with his dad. Morning came slow and kind. The first thing Jack heard was the rattle of pine cones on his truck bed. The second was the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere down the hill. Someone had decided to mix farm life with mountain suburbia. He stretched, poured himself a thermos cup of coffee, and looked out over the ridge. Sunlight bounced off rooftops in the valley below, and for a moment, he thought, yeah, this is exactly how I want my weekends to feel. He didn't know that within an hour, that peace would be interrupted by the sound of tires crunching gravel. A sound that never meant good news in a quiet neighborhood. 2 county cruisers rolled up slowly, their radios crackling. Jack raised an eyebrow. Well, that's new, he muttered, setting his mug down. The first officer stepped out, one hand resting lightly on his belt, the other holding a notepad. Morning, sir. We got a call about a possible break-in. You the property owner here? Jack blinked. A break-in? Into my own place. The second officer looked apologetic. Neighbor said a man was camping out here in a pickup truck. Claimed you might be a squatter. Jack chuckled under his breath. Yeah, well, tell her the squatter's name is on the deed. He reached into his glove box and pulled out a folded copy of the property document. Been in my family since 1954. My dad built that cabin with his own hands. The officers glanced at each other, clearly embarrassed. They looked around, saw the neat stack of tools, the coffee thermos, the American flag plaque on the cabin wall, and probably realized this wasn't exactly the den of a criminal mastermind. Sorry about the misunderstanding, Mr. Harlan, the first one said, handing back the paper. Sometimes folks get a little protective around here. Jack smiled, that patient kind of smile you give someone who doesn't deserve the brunt of your annoyance. No harm done. I'll keep an eye out for the suspicious squatter next time I see him in my mirror. The cruisers rolled away, gravel popping under their tires, and the woods fell quiet again. Jack leaned against the porch post, sipping his coffee. But his peace didn't last long. From the corner of his eye, he saw her visor, clipboard, and the kind of purposeful stride that could only belong to someone with a title like HOA Vice Chair. Karen Wilcox. He'd met her once, briefly, when she was handing out flyers about unified mailbox color compliance. He'd laughed back then, thinking it was a joke. Mr. Harlan, she said crisply, not even offering a hello. We had a report of an unauthorized occupant. Jack tilted his head. You mean me? She glanced at his truck as if it personally offended her. This property falls under HOA jurisdiction now, and overnight occupancy of undeveloped or unregistered structures violates Section 8, Clause 14 of the Community Standards. Jack blinked. You mean sleeping at my own cabin? Her voice stayed level, but her eyes had that look of someone enjoying the smell of fresh authority. It's not about ownership. It's about compliance. We can't have exceptions. Jack chuckled, not unkindly. Ma'am, with all due respect, this place was standing here before your HOA even had a name. My father built that roof you're standing under. Karen pursed her lips, clearly unamused by history lessons. I understand you feel entitled to nostalgia, but we have rules for a reason. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it sting. I bet you do. She looked momentarily unsure whether that was a compliment or not. Then, as if she had somewhere more important to be, she scribbled something on her clipboard and said, "Expect a formal notice." When she walked off, Jack shook his head. Formal notice, he muttered, half to himself. Guess hospitality's against the law now. He spent the rest of that morning hammering shingles, the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk drowning out his irritation. Every few minutes he caught himself smiling, half amused, half incredulous. The idea that someone would call the police because a man slept on his own property was so ridiculous, it looped back around to funny. By noon, he was almost over it. He figured she'd cool off once the misunderstanding settled. Folks like Karen usually just needed to feel heard. He cleaned his tools, packed up the leftover nails, and drove into town to grab a burger at the diner. The waitress, who'd known his dad, asked how the cabin repairs were going. He grinned. Going fine. Except apparently I'm not allowed to live on my own land. She laughed, thinking he was joking. When he came back that evening, the sun had dipped low, and the ridge was painted gold. He stood on the porch steps, admiring the view, and thought, yeah, tomorrow I'll finish the roof and call it a weekend. He felt calm again, even a little proud that he hadn't lost his temper earlier. Monday morning, however, reality came knocking. Or rather, it came through the mail slot. A crisp white envelope stamped, Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. He turned it over in his hands, felt that little twist of dread in his stomach that only official letters seemed to cause. Inside was a neatly typed notice. Violation notice. Offense. Unauthorized overnight occupancy. Clause 8.14. Fine. $250. Remedy. Cease occupancy and remove vehicle within 72 hours. He read it twice, then a third time, each pass slower than the last. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or call the county clerk. He chose laughter, it felt healthier. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat on the porch again. Letter in one hand, mug in the other. The birds didn't care. The forest didn't care. But somewhere down the road, Karen was probably polishing her visor and checking him off a list. Jack sighed, folding the letter neatly. All right, he said to no one in particular. If that's how they want to play it. He tucked the letter in his jacket pocket, the corner peeking out like a small white flag. The breeze picked up, carrying the faint sound of someone's leaf blower whining in the distance. He took a slow sip of coffee, eyes narrowing slightly. That letter, he murmured, changed everything. Jack had always believed that most problems could be solved with patience and good manners. That belief took a hit the moment he opened the second letter from the HOA. It was Tuesday morning, and the envelope sat in his mailbox like it knew it was about to ruin his day. Inside was a final notice of noncompliance, which sounded impressive for something so stupid. The fine had doubled to $500, and there was a note that said, "Failure to comply may result in escalation to the board." He snorted. Escalation? What are they going to do? Drop leaflets? The absurdity of it was almost entertaining. Almost. He called the number listed at the bottom, thinking maybe he could clear this up with one civil conversation. After 3 rings, a voice answered. Cedar Ridge HOA. This is Karen speaking. Of course it was. Morning, Karen. It's Jack Harlan, he said. I think there's been a little mix-up. I got another notice about, me staying at my own property. Her tone was the vocal equivalent of an eyebrow raise. Yes, Mr. Harlan. As per the community standards, unregistered overnight occupancy is prohibited. He chuckled softly. Right, but that doesn't apply to owners, correct? I mean, I'm not renting. I'm not squatting. I am the owner. Karen paused just long enough to make it clear she didn't care. All properties within Cedar Ridge fall under the HOA's governance. Exceptions can't be made based on sentimentality. Sentimentality, Jack repeated. That's what we're calling owning property now? Sir, she said. Rules exist for a reason. Sure do, he replied, voice calm but sharp enough to cut paper. And I have a feeling you folks are about to learn exactly what that reason is. She didn't answer, which he took as a small victory. He hung up before she could get the last word. By the weekend, things had escalated in ways only HOA people could imagine. On Friday, he returned to find a bright orange tag taped to his porch post that said, "Unauthorized materials storage." They meant his toolbox. He looked around at the sea of identical homes, some with half-finished decks, others with kids' bikes strewn across driveways. But sure, his toolbox was the threat. He peeled off the tag, crumpled it, and dropped it in his pocket. A few minutes later, his friend Ralph rolled up in his mail truck. Ralph was the kind of guy who'd been delivering letters so long, he probably knew every secret in town but never told a soul. "Hey, I heard you made the newsletter," Ralph called, grinning. Jack frowned. Newsletter. Ralph handed him a folded paper from the passenger seat. There, in the HOA's neat little bulletin, was a section titled Community Watch Update. It read, "Local resident reported unauthorized occupancy at an unregistered cabin. HOA has taken necessary action to preserve community safety." Jack's eyebrows went up so high they nearly left his forehead. "I'm the unauthorized occupancy?" "Guess so," Ralph said, laughing. "Congratulations. You're officially the neighborhood bogeyman." Jack couldn't help but chuckle, though there was an edge to it now. "You ever seen a firefighter lose his cool over a newsletter, Ralph?" "Not yet," Ralph said. "But I got a front row seat if it happens." That night, Jack sat at the cabin's kitchen table, the letter and newsletter laid out beside his coffee cup. The absurdity of it all was starting to curdle into something heavier. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore, it was theater, bureaucratic theater. And Karen was the director. He decided to document everything. He started taking pictures, date-stamped shots of his property, his truck, the mailbox. If they wanted to play by the book, he'd bring his own. Saturday morning, he caught movement through the blinds. Karen, visor gleaming like a badge of self-importance, was walking along the road with her clipboard, snapping photos of his cabin. She had the expression of someone convinced she was saving civilization one complaint at a time. Jack opened the door and called out, "Morning, Karen. You want me to pose with the truck this time?" She froze mid-step. "I'm documenting for compliance records." He smiled politely. "You got my good side?" She turned on her heel and walked off without replying. The moment she disappeared around the bend, Jack muttered, "Guess that's a no." By noon, the neighborhood gossip mill was in full swing. Cedar Ridge was the kind of place where a bird sneezing could start a rumor. At the local coffee shop, two residents whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "I heard he's living there illegally." "Really? I thought he was a veteran." "Maybe both." Jack didn't take it personally. People loved a scandal, even a small one. What bothered him was the principle of it. The idea that a group of people could rewrite common sense just because they printed it in a binder. Later that afternoon, his neighbor Linda came by with a basket of cookies. She was one of those rare souls who understood how to help without prying. "I figured you could use some sugar," she said, setting the basket down. "Karen's been talking about you like you're running a boot camp up here." Jack laughed. "Well, she's half right. I do make myself follow orders, mine." Linda smiled, shaking her head. "Don't let her get under your skin. She fined me last year because my wind chime was too reflective. Said it was a distraction to drivers." He raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" "Oh, dead serious," she said. "You know what I did? Replaced it with one shaped like a little HOA logo." She didn't even notice. That made him laugh harder than he had all week. "You might be my new hero, Linda." But the laughter faded when he returned to the porch that evening and found another notice taped to his front door, this one thicker. Inside were printed photos of his truck, his porch, and his cabin, each labeled violation area. At the bottom, in bold, "Continued noncompliance may result in legal action." Jack sat on the steps, the letter fluttering in the breeze beside him. The forest was quiet, but his patience was running out of air. He wasn't angry, not really. Anger was for rookies. What he felt was a kind of tired determination, the kind that comes when you realize you're dealing with people who mistake noise for power. Sunday morning, Ralph stopped by again, holding a cup of gas station coffee. "Heard they're calling an HOA meeting about you next week," he said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "About me, huh? Guess I'm the agenda now." Karen's spinning it as a community safety update. "You might want to show up." "Oh, I'll be there," Jack said, leaning back against his truck. Wouldn't miss it. That day he walked around his property, looking at it with fresh eyes. Every pine needle, every creaking board meant something to him. His father had mixed the concrete for that porch himself. His mother had painted the shutters. This wasn't just land. It was legacy. And to think someone was threatening him with fines for daring to sleep on it. He thought about all the years he'd spent running into burning buildings while people like Karen wrote memos about fence height. There was a kind of irony in that. He smiled at the thought, then whispered, "All right, you want rules? We'll play by them." He spent the rest of Sunday organizing paperwork, old deeds, property surveys, tax records. He hadn't looked through them in years, but touching those yellowed pages felt grounding. His father's name was on the earliest ones, written in the careful cursive of another time. Then something caught his eye, a small note at the bottom of a 1947 map that read, "Access road maintained under private easement." He leaned back, staring at it, a slow grin forming. "Well," he said softly, "that's interesting, but that revelation would come later. For now," he folded the paper neatly and slid it into a folder marked cabin. He wasn't sure yet what he'd do with it, but he knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, the cabin glowed gold again. He sat on the porch with his coffee, same as always, though the air felt heavier now. Somewhere down the road, Karen's voice carried faintly through the pines, lecturing another homeowner about mailbox colors. Jack smiled to himself, a quiet, knowing smile. "I thought that was the end of it," he said softly, staring at the horizon. "I was wrong." By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, Jack had traded irritation for a kind of measured amusement. He wasn't angry anymore, he was curious about how far people could stretch logic before it snapped. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in tight rows like a courtroom nobody asked for. On one wall hung a banner that said, "Together we keep Cedar Ridge beautiful." Jack smirked at that. Beautiful, sure, but only if you followed the manual. He arrived early, a small act of quiet rebellion. Ralph tagged along for moral support, wearing his postal uniform even though he was long retired. "Makes them nervous," Ralph whispered as they took seats in the second row. "They think you're here to deliver something official." One by one, neighbors trickled in, some curious, some pretending not to look at him. Karen was at the front, visor perfectly angled, flipping through a color-coded binder like she was running a congressional hearing. Beside her sat two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's bring this meeting to order," she announced, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "First topic, unauthorized property use at Lot 14B, also known as the Harlan Cabin." The way she said Harlan Cabin made it sound like she was naming a crime scene. Jack leaned back, arms crossed, listening. Karen spoke with the tone of someone who thought professionalism and pettiness were synonyms. "We have received multiple reports of overnight occupancy, unapproved vehicle storage, and," she squinted at the paper, "potential safety hazards due to non-standard roofing activity." Ralph whispered, "Non-standard roofing? That's a hammer and nails." Jack kept his expression calm. He'd fought house fires with fewer witnesses than this. Karen continued, "While we appreciate Mr. Harlan's dedication to maintaining his property, the HOA must enforce standards equally to preserve community harmony." Jack raised a hand. "Mind if I say something?" Her lips tightened. Briefly, he stood, his voice even. I just want to point out that the Harlan cabin, as you call it, was built before this HOA existed, before half these streets were paved. My father built it with permits from a county that didn't even know what a homeowners association was. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen held up her hand. Mr. Harlan, regardless of history, all properties within Cedar Ridge boundaries are subject to the bylaws, he finished with her. I've read them, cover to cover. 3 times, in fact. It's a riveting sequel to How to Miss the Point. A few chuckles broke out. Ralph tried not to choke on his coffee. Karen's cheeks tightened into that particular shade of pink that meant she'd lost control of the room but wasn't ready to admit it. We're simply ensuring order, Mr. Harlan. I like order, Jack said calmly. In fact, I spent 30 years bringing it to places that were on fire. He let that hang there just long enough. So maybe I know a thing or two about safety. She didn't respond. She just scribbled something in her notes and moved on. But Jack could see it, the shift. Her confidence had hairline cracks now. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors came up quietly to shake his hand. Didn't know your dad built that cabin, one said. Another muttered, don't let her push you around. Even those who stayed neutral seemed less sure of Karen's crusade. Later that night, back at the cabin, Jack sat by the porch light flipping through his father's old file box. The papers were yellowed and fragile, smelling faintly of tobacco and cedar. He wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly. Something to prove his ownership? His right to exist without a permission slip. But then he found it. A county map from 1947 with hand-drawn borders. The note in his father's neat handwriting read, Private access road maintained by Harlan family. Use permitted by neighboring properties. He leaned back, whistling low. Well, I'll be. He spent hours verifying it, cross-referencing deeds, comparing survey lines. The access road that every HOA resident used to get to their homes technically crossed his property line. Not by much, but enough to matter. Enough that, in a legal sense, the entire community was using his family's land by permission. He called a friend from his old fire department who'd gone into real estate law after retirement. Tom, he said, hypothetically, if someone owned the land under a community road, Tom laughed. Hypothetically, they'd have the HOA on a leash. Jack grinned. Hypothetically speaking, that's good to know. The next morning, he drove to the county office, paperwork in hand. The clerk, an older man with coffee stains on his tie, looked over the documents and nodded slowly. Yep, it's in the record. Easement's technically private. Hasn't been contested since your dad filed it. Surprised the HOA didn't catch that. Not as surprised as they're gonna be, Jack said, smiling. He spent the next week preparing. He wasn't plotting revenge, at least not the kind you could call mean-spirited. No, this was about balance. About showing people that authority without humility always collapses under its own weight. He crafted a small wooden post with a hand-painted sign, Private Access Easement. Use by permission only. He placed it neatly at the entrance to the road, right beside the decorative HOA sign that read, Welcome to Cedar Ridge, where community comes first. That afternoon, as he was tightening the post into the soil, a familiar voice cut through the air. What do you think you're doing, Mr. Harlan? Karen stood there, clipboard in hand like a shield. Her tone wavered between outrage and disbelief. Just putting up a sign, Jack said evenly. You can't make modifications to community property without board approval. Good thing this isn't community property, he replied, brushing dust from his hands. It's mine. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She pointed at the road like it would back her up. This is a public thoroughfare under HOA jurisdiction. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded copy of the deed, and handed it to her. Not according to this. Easement's private. I've just been letting folks use it out of goodwill. She scanned it quickly, color draining from her face. This can't be right. Oh, it's right, he said with a smile. But don't worry, I'm not shutting it down. I'm just labeling things correctly. You like things labeled, don't you? Her voice sharpened. I'll be contacting the board about this. Please do, he said. And while you're at it, you might ask your lawyer to double-check Clause 14 about easement access. You'll find an interesting loophole. She turned on her heel, muttering something about legal overreach, and stormed off. Jack watched her go, the faintest smirk playing on his lips. That night, the neighborhood buzzed like a beehive. People slowed down as they passed the new sign, reading it twice, whispering to their spouses. The rumor mill went into overdrive. Did you hear Harlan owns the road? Is he gonna block it off? Can the HOA fine him for that? Jack didn't need to say a word. He just went about his repairs, whistling softly while the entire community simmered in uncertainty. By the end of the week, a certified envelope arrived. This one from the HOA's legal representative. The letter was polite, overly so, the kind of politeness that hides panic. It requested clarification regarding the ownership and usage terms of the Cedar Ridge access road. Jack read it twice, smiled, and drafted a short reply through his attorney. Ownership confirmed. Use remains by permission of the Harlan family, pending continued good neighborly conduct. The next morning, Karen found a copy of that same letter in her own mailbox, signed and stamped. When Ralph came by later, he noticed the grin on Jack's face. "You look like a man who just found the punchline to a long joke," he said. "Something like that," Jack replied, handing him the letter. Ralph read it and let out a long, low whistle. "You just turned the HOA's road into your driveway." Jack sipped his coffee, eyes on the horizon. "They wanted order," he said. "I'm just helping them understand what it really looks like." That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, the air was thick with gossip, confusion, and just a hint of poetic justice. Karen hadn't made her next move yet, but she would. People like her always did. And when she did, he'd be ready. He stood on the porch, the sign visible from where he stood, and thought of his father. "Guess the old man knew what he was doing," he murmured. Then, with a half-smile, he added quietly, "They have no idea what's coming." For 3 days, the neighborhood buzzed like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. People slowed their SUVs near the new sign, taking photos like tourists at a monument. The next-door kids even used it as a landmark, "Meet by the Harlan Road sign." By Thursday, someone had posted about it on the Cedar Ridge Facebook group. The post's caption read, "Can he really do that?" 50 comments deep. Everyone had an opinion and not a single fact. Some defended him. "It's his property, he's got the deed." Others panicked. "What if he locks the gate? We'll be trapped." One person suggested calling the county. Another tagged Karen. Karen, of course, was already in motion. She called a special emergency HOA session, which sounded like something you'd reserve for alien invasions, not driveway disputes. Flyers appeared in mailboxes the next morning. Urgent community meeting. Road access issue. The language was dramatic, even for her. Phrases like safety implications and unauthorized signage. Jack read it while drinking coffee, chuckled, and pinned it to his fridge with a magnet shaped like a firefighter's helmet. "Emergency over a road," he muttered. "Guess that's progress." The meeting took place on Saturday morning. Jack didn't bother dressing up. Jeans, flannel shirt, boots still dusty from the cabin. When he arrived, the clubhouse parking lot was packed. Neighbors huddled in small circles, whispering. Some gave him polite nods. Others looked at him like he'd personally closed the interstate. Inside, Karen stood at the front of the room in her usual spot, flanked by the board president and a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, apparently the HOA's legal counsel. Karen opened the meeting with her signature blend of condescension and self-righteousness. "We are here to address a concerning development regarding property access and community cohesion," she said, gesturing toward a projected image of Jack's sign on the wall behind her. "Certain individuals have taken unilateral actions that may endanger our shared infrastructure." Jack leaned over to Ralph, who'd tagged along again. "Shared infrastructure," he whispered. "That's fancy talk for asphalt." Karen went on for nearly 10 minutes, reading from printouts that sounded like she'd Googled how to sound official in an HOA meeting. The crowd grew restless. Finally, the HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Gordon who usually stayed out of conflicts, cleared his throat. Perhaps Mr. Harlan would like to explain his perspective? Jack stood, nodding politely. Sure. My perspective's simple. My father built the original access road before any of these houses existed. The county records confirm it's private property. Always has been. I've never stopped anyone from using it, and I don't plan to. I just thought it might be nice if folks knew who actually maintains the ground they drive on. Karen's lips tightened. So you're admitting this was a deliberate attempt to assert ownership over community land? He smiled slightly. Not community land, ma'am. Family land. You're welcome to keep using it, so long as everyone acts neighborly. That's what community means, right? A few people chuckled under their breath. Someone clapped once before stopping awkwardly. Karen looked to the lawyer, desperate for backup. The man cleared his throat. Technically speaking, Mr. Harlan is within his rights. The easement was never transferred to the HOA during development. The silence that followed was delicious. You could practically hear Karen's pride deflating. She recovered quickly, voice going sharp again. Even so, his actions have caused confusion and anxiety among residents. Jack tilted his head. If a sign causes anxiety, maybe the problem isn't the sign. The room laughed. Even Gordon cracked a smile. That was the beginning of the HOA meltdown. By Monday, rumors had reached critical mass. One resident claimed Jack was planning to install a toll booth. Another swore she'd seen him measuring for a gate. Someone even posted a photo of a random orange cone near the road, insisting it was the start of construction. Karen went door to door clarifying misinformation, though her version of clarity involved a lot of panic. When she showed up at Jack's cabin again, she didn't bother with pleasantries. You're causing a disruption, she said, waving a sheaf of papers. Jack was sitting on his porch, sanding a piece of wood. Morning, Karen. This isn't funny, she snapped. People are worried. About what? The truth. She crossed her arms. We can't run a community on threats of restricted access. Good thing I haven't restricted anything, he said calmly. I just reminded everyone who owns what. You like reminders. Her eyes narrowed. You think this makes you clever? He gave her a slow smile. No, ma'am. Just compliant. That word hit her like a slap. She spun on her heel and stormed off. By Wednesday, the HOA's panic had evolved into full-blown performance art. They held another meeting, this one a safety briefing complete with printed maps and color-coded risk assessments. Jack skipped it. Instead, he sat on his porch listening to the distant hum of conversation drifting through the trees. It was oddly satisfying, but the tension wasn't done yet. Late Thursday afternoon, he found a voicemail from Karen. Her voice trembled with restrained fury. Mr. Harlan, this is an official warning. Your actions constitute interference with community governance. We will pursue all necessary remedies if you continue this behavior. He listened twice, smiled, and deleted it. That evening, he went down to the hardware store and bought a new sign. This one was nicer. Painted lettering, varnished wood, sturdy enough to last decades. It read, Private Drive, Residents Welcome by courtesy of J. Harlan, property owner. He planted it the next morning, right beside the original, angled just so that it caught the morning sun. It took less than 2 hours for Karen to notice. Jack was sitting on the porch when her silver SUV screeched to a stop at the road's edge. She marched up, fuming. You're mocking the HOA, she hissed. No, he said, sipping his coffee. I'm branding hospitality. Branding what? He gestured at the sign. You're welcome by courtesy. Courtesy's free, but it can be revoked. Her jaw dropped. You wouldn't dare. He smiled. You've seen me sleep in my truck, ma'am. You should know by now there's not much I won't do if I'm right. She left without another word. But by that evening, the neighborhood's private Facebook group exploded again. Some thought Jack was a hero. Others feared he'd go full Wild West and install a gatehouse. It was chaos, but the quiet, delicious kind of chaos that comes from truth poking holes in bureaucracy. 2 days later, Jack received a knock on the door. It wasn't Karen this time, it was Gordon, the HOA president. He looked embarrassed. Mind if I come in? Sure thing, Jack said, pouring him a cup of coffee. Gordon sighed. I just came to say, look, the board's decided to de-escalate. Our lawyer confirmed everything you said is legitimate. Frankly, we don't want to pick this fight. Karen's passionate. That's one word for it, Jack said. Gordon rubbed the back of his neck. She's threatening to call the county again, but even they laughed when she did last time. We'd rather just move on. Jack nodded. That's fine by me. I don't hold grudges. I hold deeds. They both laughed quietly. When Gordon left, Jack felt a rare sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. That evening, he stood at the edge of his porch, looking down the road as the sun set behind the trees. The air smelled like pine and distant barbecue smoke. For the first time in weeks, he felt calm again. But calm never lasted long in Cedar Ridge. At exactly 7 p.m., he found another envelope in his mailbox. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was an invitation, cream cardstock, elegant script. You are cordially invited to the Cedar Ridge Community Appreciation Barbecue, hosted by J. Harlan, this Saturday at 4 p.m. He chuckled, realizing his own attorney had mailed the invitations to every resident earlier that week, just as he'd asked. The barbecue was part celebration, part olive branch, part trap. Karen would show up, of course. She'd have to. Her pride wouldn't let her stay home while he entertained her community. Jack leaned against the porch railing, holding the invitation up to the last streak of sunlight. Well, he said quietly, round two's gonna be fun. Then he looked straight down the road, where Karen's SUV was parked at the corner like a patrol car waiting for a speed trap. She was watching his cabin, clipboard in hand, pretending to check something on her phone. He smiled, a small, knowing grin that said everything without words. Then I got the letter, he murmured. That changed everything again. Saturday arrived warm and clear, the kind of afternoon that made the ridge smell like sun-warmed pine and grill smoke. Jack started early, stringing a few modest lights around the cabin porch, setting up 2 folding tables he'd borrowed from Ralph, and lining them with paper plates and red cups. He wasn't much for parties, but this wasn't really a party. This was closure disguised as hospitality, a subtle reminder that generosity beats control every time. He'd mailed invitations to every household in Cedar Ridge, even the ones that had signed Karen's earlier safety concern petition. He didn't word them dramatically, just polite and friendly. Join me at the Harlan cabin for good food, better company, and a small piece of neighborhood history. By mid-afternoon, the smell of barbecued ribs rolled down the access road like a peace offering in smoke form. Ralph manned the grill, wearing his postal cap backward. Never thought I'd see this many HOA folks lining up for your ribs, he said, flipping a rack. Jack smirked. Free food heals all wounds. Cars started trickling in. Families from the neat cul-de-sacs down the hill, couples holding casseroles like shields, a few curious teens snapping pictures of the famous sign. Even Gordon, the HOA president, arrived early, sleeves rolled up, doing his best to look neutral. Karen was the last one to appear. Her silver SUV pulled up slow, dust swirling behind it. She stepped out dressed like she was attending a Senate hearing. Pressed slacks, white blouse, clipboard tucked under her arm. Her visor was gone this time, replaced with dark sunglasses that couldn't quite hide the tightness around her mouth. Afternoon, Karen, Jack said, handing her a plate. Hope you brought an appetite. I wasn't sure if this was an official event, she said flatly. Oh, it's official all right, he said, smiling. It's happening. She hesitated, but hunger or curiosity got the better of her. She joined the line, accepted a rib, and took a seat at one of the tables where neighbors were already laughing and swapping stories. Jack didn't make a speech right away. He let the food and small talk loosen everyone up first. Kids chased each other between the trees, dogs barked. Someone turned on old country music from their truck stereo. It felt less like a community under siege and more like the kind of neighborhood it was supposed to be before the paperwork took over. When most plates were empty and people had settled into that lazy post-meal calm, Jack stepped up to the porch. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried easily, the practiced projection of a man used to giving orders through smoke and noise. "Folks," he began, "I want to thank you for coming. I know it's been an interesting few weeks. I also know some of you probably thought this sign business meant I was trying to stir up trouble." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. He waited for them to die down. "I just wanted to set the record straight. My father, John Harlan, built this cabin back in 1954. Before there were paved roads, before there were mailboxes with rules about what color they can be. Back then, the road you all drove up today didn't even have a name. It was just the lane to Harlan's place. He poured gravel on it himself, kept it clear through every winter storm. When this area got developed into what we now call Cedar Ridge, the county used that same lane. My dad never charged a dime. Said good neighbors share what they have." He paused, glancing around. Heads nodded. Some people looked genuinely moved. "I didn't put up that sign to pick a fight," he continued. "I put it up because people forgot what the word neighbor means. It's not about fines and clauses. It's about respect. Mutual, quiet respect." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Ralph called out, "Tell it, Jack," earning a round of laughter. Jack smiled, then gestured toward the small wooden sign visible from where they stood. "That road has been open to everyone for nearly 70 years, by permission of the Harlan family. That's still true today, but permission goes both ways. It's something we all give each other every day. Permission to live in peace, to use good sense, to laugh instead of argue." He stepped back, pulling something from behind the table, a framed black and white photo. "This here's my dad," he said, holding it up, pouring the first layer of gravel on that road. The man in the background with the wheelbarrow, the old county clerk's father. This road's as local as it gets. The photo made its way through the crowd. Conversations turned softer. People leaned in, studying the faces in the picture like they were reading family history. Then someone asked, "So what happens now? With the HOA?" Jack smiled faintly. "That's up to the HOA. But as far as I'm concerned, everything stays the same. The road's open, the cabin's standing, and everyone's still welcome here, as long as nobody forgets who they're waving at." The laughter that followed was warm, not mocking. Even Gordon clapped. Karen, however, sat perfectly still. The color had drained from her face as she studied the photo now sitting on the picnic table. She seemed to realize what everyone else already had. She'd been enforcing rules on a piece of land that didn't belong to her, and the proof was laminated and framed for all to see. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she looked small. Jack didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply walked over, placed a second frame in front of her. A printed copy of the county deed with her own signature on a notice acknowledging HOA boundary limits. "I thought you might want this for your records," he said quietly. She blinked, staring down at the document. Her hand hovered above it for a moment before she picked it up. "You're keeping the road open?" she asked, voice thin. "Of course," Jack said. "I'm not unreasonable. I'm just reminding folks that goodwill isn't a given. It's earned." Karen nodded slowly, then set the frame down, looking around at the laughing, relaxed neighbors. Her posture softened a little. Maybe the board overstepped." Ralph muttered, "You think?" But Jack shot him a look that said be kind. Karen swallowed her pride the way people swallow bad medicine, grimace and all. "Thank you for clarifying the record," she said, each word carefully measured. Jack offered a handshake. She took it. For a brief second, the whole place went quiet, like everyone understood this was the real victory. Not the paperwork, not the sign, but the moment dignity beat pettiness. "Any time," he said. "Next time. Knock first before calling the cops." That broke the tension. The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Even Karen cracked a reluctant smile. As the sun slid lower, the barbecue turned from ceremony to celebration. Music played, dogs begged for scraps, and someone started roasting marshmallows over the grill. It was ordinary life again, the good kind of ordinary. Jack sat back in a folding chair, sipping lemonade, watching people relax like the ridge had exhaled. Gordon came over, holding a plate of ribs. You realize you just saved the HOA from itself, right? Jack chuckled. Didn't do it for them. Did it for peace and quiet. You're gonna get that now, Gordon said. I'm officially putting you down for our new Community Heritage Committee. We need a sane voice. Jack raised his cup. I'll pass. I already did my time in emergencies. Later, when most folks had gone home, a few stayed behind to help clean up. Ralph stacked chairs, humming. Linda brought over a tray of leftover brownies. You won, she said simply. Jack shook his head. Nah, we just remembered how to act human for a bit. The last car to leave was Karen's. She paused at the end of the driveway, rolled down her window, and waved. It wasn't a big wave, just two fingers, quick and stiff, but it was more than he'd expected. As dusk settled, the string lights glowed warm against the cabin's porch. Jack looked at the empty plates, the quiet road, the sign that gleamed faintly in the fading light. It all felt lighter somehow, like the land itself had relaxed. He thought of his father, the steady way he used to talk about patience, how real strength didn't shout. It waited. Jack smiled at the memory, whispering, Guess you were right again, old man. He turned to Ralph, who was scraping the last bits off the grill. You think they'll ever send me another fine? Ralph grinned. If they do, frame it. Hang it next to the deed. Jack laughed, genuine and easy. Good idea. The forest hummed its evening song. Crickets, rustling leaves, the faint creak of the porch boards under his boots. Somewhere down the ridge, someone lit another fire, and the wind carried the faint smell of smoke and barbecue, mingled with peace. He set down his cup, picked up a small hand rake, and idly cleaned a patch of grass by the steps. First time I've mowed the lawn, he said softly, smiling while I did it. Monday morning came quiet and clear, sunlight dripping down through the trees like honey. The ridge looked exactly as it had before the whole ordeal began. Dew on the pine needles, blue jays bickering in the branches, the faint hum of someone's lawnmower in the distance. But something in the air had shifted. It wasn't the landscape that had changed. It was the people. Cedar Ridge felt softer now, less like a rulebook and more like a neighborhood. Jack stood on the porch with his coffee, same mug, same view, but the world looked lighter somehow. Down the road, he could see Linda walking her dog. She waved without hesitation this time, and he waved back. 2 houses farther, a teenager on a bike gave him a little salute. Even the sprinklers sounded friendlier, like the whole place was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. He sat down on the porch steps, letting the morning warmth soak into his hands. The barbecue was only 2 days behind him, but it already felt like a story from a different season. People had lingered long after sunset that night, talking, laughing, actually being neighborly. The next morning, his phone had lit up with thank you messages, photos, and even one from Gordon saying, "We might have needed that more than we realized." What surprised him most, though, was the email from Karen. It arrived at exactly 6:04 a.m. Sunday morning, time-stamped like an apology that couldn't wait. It was brief, just 3 sentences. Mr. Harlan, thank you for hosting yesterday's event. The board appreciates your clarification and generosity. I hope we can start fresh. No signature, no titles, no threats. Just plain words, almost human. Jack didn't reply right away. He figured silence was answer enough, a calm acknowledgement that the feud was over. But he printed the email and pinned it to the fridge anyway. It made a fine souvenir. He spent the rest of that morning cleaning up. Folding chairs stacked, leftover paper plates tossed, grill scrubbed to shining. Ralph stopped by mid-morning, carrying 2 mugs and a box of donuts. Figured you earned a break, he said. Jack grinned. After a week like that, I might take a year. They sat on the porch munching donuts, watching a blue truck drive past at the slow, unhurried pace of people who finally trusted their road again. Ralph chuckled. Never thought I'd see the day you turned an HOA into a fan club. Jack smirked. They're not fans. They're just relieved I didn't start charging tolls. Ralph laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. You'd make a fortune. Tempting, Jack said. But peace pays better. As the morning drifted on, The two men fell into that comfortable silence that only old friends know. No need to fill the air, just shared understanding. Every so often, a neighbor would pass by, honking or waving, and Ralph would nudge him, whispering, "Celebrity treatment." Jack just shook his head. Around noon, the mail truck arrived. The new carrier, a young guy named Eric, handed Jack a stack of envelopes and said, "Sir, your HOA sent you something. Don't worry, it's not a fine." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's already the best thing they've ever sent me." He flipped through the stack until he found the envelope marked with the Cedar Ridge logo. Inside was the latest HOA newsletter, and right on page 1 was a section titled Community Heritage Corner. He read it aloud to Ralph. "This month, we celebrate the legacy of the Harlan family, whose original craftsmanship and generosity helped shape the land we now call home. The Cedar Ridge Access Road, historically known as Harlan Way, remains a symbol of community cooperation and respect." Ralph whistled low. "They turned you into a landmark." Jack grinned. Funny how fast history rewrites itself when paperwork changes hands. He flipped the page and burst out laughing. There was a color photo of his cabin, complete with the sign, and underneath, a caption that read, "Preserved with gratitude, thanks to the collaborative spirit of all residents." "Collaborative," Ralph said, snorting. "That's one way to spell surrender." Jack folded the newsletter and tucked it under his arm. "I'll take it. Beats a violation notice." After Ralph left, the day unfolded lazily. Jack walked down the road, greeting people as he went. He noticed small things he hadn't before. The smell of someone baking cinnamon rolls, the sight of an old man patching a fence while humming, the laughter of kids echoing off driveways. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it finally felt real again. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, he saw Karen kneeling by a flower bed in front of her house, planting something bright yellow. For a moment, he considered just walking by, but politeness won out. "Morning," he called. She looked up, hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Mr. Harlan." "Karen," he said, nodding. "Flowers look good." "Marigolds," she said. "They're supposed to keep deer away. Or at least that's what the internet says. Worth a try." They stood in a pause long enough to be awkward. Then she added, I wanted to say thank you again for how you handled everything." Jack shrugged. "No hard feelings. You were just doing your job," enthusiastically. She winced a little but smiled. "I might have been overzealous." "Might have," he repeated with a grin. "But you showed up, and that counts for something." She nodded, dusting her hands on her jeans. "For what it's worth, the board decided to revise some of our enforcement guidelines. You inspired a new section called Community Mediation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I inspired a policy?" "Apparently," she said. "It's meant to remind us that common sense still applies." "Well," he said, tipping his cap, "that's one policy I can get behind." When he got back to the cabin, he poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, thinking about how easily people forget that life doesn't need to be complicated. All it took was a barbecue and a little humility to turn a war zone into a neighborhood again. He spent the afternoon in the yard, fixing a loose shutter, trimming a few weeds, just enjoying the rhythm of quiet work. Every sound felt sharper now, the chirp of crickets, the crunch of gravel under tires, the low rumble of wind through the pines. Somewhere behind him, the screen door creaked, and Ralph's voice called out, "You fixing something again? I thought you said peace paid better." Jack grinned without turning. "This isn't fixing. This is maintenance. Peace needs that too." "Fair point," Ralph said. Rumor is Karen's nominating you for some kind of community appreciation thing." Jack snorted. "If she shows up with a plaque, I'm hanging it next to my fine notice." Ralph laughed. "That's the spirit." Evening settled slowly, painting everything gold. The last rays of sunlight caught the edge of the new sign, making the carved letters glow. "Private drive, residents welcome by courtesy of J. Harlan." The words no longer felt like a warning. They felt like balance, like the right kind of boundary, clear but kind. Jack sat on the porch as the first stars appeared. His old dog, who'd wandered up from a neighbor's yard, curled at his feet. He scratched behind its ears and said, "You ever notice people are a lot like fences? Some need mending, some need painting, but most just need a gate that swings both ways." The dog thumped its tail in approval. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly beneath him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about violations or rules or signatures. He was thinking about his father, about decency, about how sometimes the best revenge isn't payback. It's peace. Somewhere down the hill, sprinklers hissed to life, steady and calm. He smiled at the sound. "There's the neighborhood soundtrack," he murmured. Inside, the clock ticked gently, marking the rhythm of a life that had slowed back to where it belonged. As he finished the last sip of coffee, he looked out at the ridge, lights twinkling from the houses below, the road snaking quietly between them. His road, their road, the same one it had always been. He thought about all the ridiculousness, the letters, the threats, the meetings, and couldn't help but laugh softly to himself. "All that," he said, shaking his head, "just to remember how to say hello." He stood, stretching, and turned toward the cabin door. Before stepping inside, he glanced back once more at the sign catching moonlight near the driveway. "So," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for the night to hear, "if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine, remember, you can't control the petty, but you can outsmart it." Then he went inside, the porch light flicked off, and Cedar Ridge settled into the kind of quiet that only comes after the storm finally runs out of things to say.